I've gone back and forth on the idea of whether we live in a non-dualist universe where everything is connected, we are all one, and things such as that, or whether we live in a dualist universe, which is where everything is separate. Everything is its own entity, its own conscious entity. And now, Alan Watts, he would tell this story about someone who could dream a full lifetime every night, and how the first few nights they would do this, they would dream of the most wonderful riches you could possibly imagine, the best possible life. And then they would start to, over time, make it more and more interesting and add in a little bit of danger, you know, make it a little bit harder. You know, like any game, you want it to be a challenge. And so after a while, they would dream a dream where everything was a surprise and they didn't remember that they were dreaming the dream, because eventually you want something different than what you have. And so what they would end up with is exactly the lives that we lead now, because that's the most interesting it could possibly be, is to completely forget who you were and not have any idea that you're safe and you're going to wake up tomorrow. But that's not really what I want to get into, because I want to talk about this dual versus non-dualism. And I just bring that up because it's a good subject, or it's a good entryway into imagining that you are this entity called God. And so you spend all of this time being everything, being connected, experiencing yourself as everything, and experiencing yourself without that separation, without that without that dualism. You are the one entity. And so after a really long time of just being yourself this way, you would want something different. Well, you think it through and it's like, well, how could I experience myself differently? You could experience yourself differently through separation. So you could actually experience pieces of yourself from the point of view of other pieces of yourself. But to do this, again, you must separate. You must separate that single consciousness into multiple consciousnesses. And so you go ahead and do that. You're like, why not? What's the worst that could happen? I've already lived a long time being this non-dual entity. I'm going to try this out and be separate for a while. And so you do. And then this goes on for a while, and you're separate, and you're all these individual pieces of consciousness experiencing yourself in different places from different perspectives. And this is fantastic, until all these individual consciousnesses, they start working together, and they come across this thing called transhumanism, or trans whateverism, depending on what universe you're in and what you call yourself. And in transhumanism, it's basically the melding of humanity with machines. And then you continue on down that logical path, and you end up with the melding of all of these consciousnesses into a single entity, because, you know, eventually my implant that I get starts to talk to the implant that you get, or starts to talk to this, you know, main computer system that we have, and your implant does the same thing. And then we become a little bit more and more machine as maybe we upload our consciousness or upload our mind or whatever that may be. But the end result of it is always going to be that we become this hive mind, this entity, because for almost, given a long enough time frame, I should say, almost every entity, or every entity, will want to experience what it's like to be part of this hive mind. And once you become part of it, there's not really so much a way to separate yourself. I suppose there would be, but I don't think it's something that you would really think to do at that point, because you would be part of the hive mind. And as this hive mind, and let's actually include a little bit more in this hive mind. Let's say that if we do want to say that everything is a conscious entity, and that could be a single atom, Well, eventually we would figure out how to include each of those atoms into this hive mind. And so the entire universe would become a single entity again. It would become that original God form that was everything. And then that God form that is everything would spend a while being that God form is everything, and would potentially forget what it was like to experience itself as multiple entities, and would then separate its consciousness into these multiple entities to experience itself that way. And then those entities would grow together to become a single entity, and on and on and on for however long that is. Now, that's just an idea of how we can be both dual and non-dual at the same time, because we are all connected. We are experiencing ourselves individually all at the same time, and the end result is going to be at some point that we are indeed transformed from these single separate entities into this single whole entity. And at some point that entity will again split itself off and will become some other type of single individual entities. And I just see it as a big cycle that keeps going. And so at no point are we ever truly separate, and at no point are we ever truly the same. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and be sure to hit like and share the video if you really did.